Hello everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. Thank you for watching. So in this video I want to spend some time talking about meta-ethics, which is a proper part of an ethical theory. So when we do an ethical theory, we know there's got to be a value theory, a theory of what counts as good, what counts as bad. And we know there has to be a normative theory, a theory that gives us a general account of what makes an action right, what makes an action wrong. And then we work out in the overall theory, we work out the relationship between the value theory and the normative theory, as we call it, the theory of rightness and wrongness. We ask questions like, is the normative theory entirely dependent on the value theory? Does the normative theory derive from the value theory? Or are some of the normative truths, if you will, are they true, or do they hold independently of a value theory? So that's what we do when we do an ethical theory. But when we do an ethical theory, very often what we will also want to do is take a step back, and we want to ask ourselves whether or not there are ethical facts in the first place. So when we ask that question, we deal with issues related to whether or not there are ethical facts. We're doing what's called the metaphysics of ethics, because we want to get at whether or not ethical facts exist, and we want to know what kinds of things they are, what kinds of things ethical facts are, if they do exist. Moreover, we want to know whether or not we can have knowledge of the ethical facts. And if we can have knowledge, we want to know whether or not we in fact do have knowledge of the ethical facts. The best argument for it being true that we can have knowledge of ethical facts is going to be that we do in fact have knowledge of ethical facts. And then of course there's just a related question, well, how do we come to ethical facts if in fact we do come to know them? So meta-ethics, broadly speaking, is concerned with these big picture questions, what I'm going to call, and what many call, the metaphysics and epistemology of ethics. Now there are other parts of a meta-ethical theory. Just to note, there's a semantics of an ethical theory. There's a theory of what our ethical terms refer to. There are questions concerned with ethical responsibility. What conditions have to be satisfied in order to be ethically responsible for one's behavior? So there are a whole range of issues that are covered in a meta-ethical theory. For our purposes today, I'm going to focus on just the metaphysics and epistemology of ethics. And I'm going to do so in the context of looking at a controversial view developed by J.L. Mackie in the middle of the 20th century in a work called The Subjectivity of Values. I say his work is controversial in part because his view goes against just ordinary thinking about ethics. Now, just ordinary thinking about ethics, we think that there are ethical truths just in everyday life. We make ethical judgments about things. We say someone did something wrong by killing someone. We say someone does something right by giving to charity. And we think we're saying something true in these kinds of cases. Moreover, we think that we know that someone does something wrong when they kill an innocent person in an unjustified way. We think that someone does something right when they help someone who's in need, in serious need. And so this is what we come to, these are the kinds of things that we believe, it seems, even before we start theorizing about whether or not there are ethical facts, whether or not we can have ethical knowledge. And Mackie, in his piece, wants to argue against these intuitive starting points, if you will, in ethics. And he wants to show that in fact there aren't any ethical facts and that we have no ethical knowledge. So that's roughly Mackie's view in the piece. The ethical judgments that we make, according to Mackie, all ultimately have a subjective flavor to them. That's why the piece that we're discussing is titled The Subjectivity of Values, the subjectivity of ethical values, for the purposes of this video. And I'll explain more what that means as this discussion proceeds. So let's just take a step back and see if we can understand what Mackie's up to, why he's making these controversial arguments in the first place. So Mackie, he is an ethical anti-realist. What that means is that there aren't any ethical facts. Surprise, surprise. He thinks that there aren't any real things as ethical facts. Now, he does think that we make moral judgments. We make ethical judgments. Let's set aside the issue of the connection between ethics and morality for a minute. He does think that we make ethical judgments. And he thinks so that the ethical judgments that we make are such that they're always going to be false in the sense that they don't express anything, or they don't capture anything that exists objectively in the world, despite the fact that he would want to say that the judgments that we make are in some sense related to our subjectivity. They are perhaps reducible to certain facts about what we feel, or certain facts about our beliefs, but they're not objective in the sense that they don't correspond to anything outside of our mind. So in this way, they're dependent. The judgments that we make are in some sense reducible to or dependent on our subjectivity, as opposed to anything objectively in the world. So why does he think that there aren't any ethical facts? Why is he an ethical anti-realist? Well, the reason seemed to be that ethical facts, were they to exist, would be weird things. At least that's the first line of argument that he offers, and that we're going to take a look at. Ethical facts would be weird things were they to exist. And here's sort of the assumption. When you work out in meta-ethics, you don't want commitment to weird kinds of things. If you can avoid them in your theory, then you should. And what would make ethical facts weird then? Well, according to Mackie, what makes ethical facts weird is the fact that they seem to be non-physical things, non-natural things. And as non-natural things, they're strange. So we got to keep in mind that Mackie is a philosopher that's driven by a kind of worldview that is empiricist in nature. So he thinks that that we should be very scientific in our philosophizing, that we should be very empirical about our theorizing. And when we are empirical in our theorizing, the kinds of things that we're going to countenance existing are going to be natural things, the things that we come to observe through the use of, guess what? Our senses. And so Mackie thinks that these ethical facts would have to be, or at the very least are likely to be, non-natural things. So then we have every reason to think that they do not exist. One reason for thinking that they'd be non-natural is the fact that we don't use our senses to observe things that should be the case. We don't seem to observe goodness floating around in the world. So whatever it is, it'd have to be something that transcends our senses, and what transcends our senses would be something non-natural. So that's the rough idea there. Another thing that he thinks is strange about ethical facts, again, were they to exist, he doesn't think they do, would be the fact that whatever is true about our ethical judgments that we make, they seem to be gripping on our motivational structure. They seem to be necessarily connected with our motivational structure. And it's hard to think about what objective feature of the world could have that kind of influence on our motivational structures that would intrinsically be the kind of thing that that motivates us to act as our moral judgments tend to. So whatever our ethical judgments are doing, according to Mackie, they're not capturing truths about an objective reality that affects our motivational system to get us to want to act. Rather, the judgments are expressing something about our internal psychologies that motivate us to act. It has to be something internal to us to account for the fact that there's this necessary connection that Mackie thinks that holds. Very, very strong connection between judging that something is morally correct to do and it being something that you are motivated to do. Not necessarily all things considered, but at least it has some effect on your motivational structure, some necessary effect on your motivational structure. Hopefully that makes sense. So those are two ways in which ethical facts are strange, and it's thinking about these strange things in a metaphysical kind of way that Mackie is appealing to here and throughout his arguments. So we have arguments from strangeness, as we call them. Now, but there's also this thought, according to Mackie, that whatever ethical facts are, were they to exist, given that they'd be non-natural, they'd be strange things to come to know. They'd be strange because we'd have to go beyond our senses to come to know them. But what can we come to know beyond our senses? So again, Mackie's working within this empiricist tradition, and he thinks that it'd be strange to say that we just come to know ethical truths through the use of our reason alone, or through some faculty, as he calls it, of intuition. Just say, through our rational intuition, coming to know that some ethical judgments are true. He thinks that that's very implausible indeed. And so we have these reasons for thinking that ethical facts do not exist. This captures his ethical anti-realism. So just to summarize, ethical facts would be very strange things were they to exist, because they either be non-natural, they'd be the kinds of things that are intrinsically directing us or guiding us to act, and they'd be strange things to come to know. Okay, so that gives us a sense of Mackie's anti-realism. But he's also an ethical skeptic in the fact that he denies that we have ethical knowledge. Why does he think this? Well, he thinks this straightforwardly because there aren't any ethical facts to know. So we express an ethical judgment. It's wrong to kill someone, right? Just all things being equal, it's wrong to kill someone. Well, when we express that judgment, there's no fact that corresponds to the judgment, so there's nothing there to be known. You can only know things that are true. It's a common sort of view about what knowledge requires. Knowledge requires knowledge of that which is true. And so Mackie argues that we have no ethical knowledge. It's directly linked, though, to the metaphysical claim that he's making, that there aren't any ethical facts. Okay, so he's an ethical anti-realist, and he's an ethical skeptic because he denies that we have ethical knowledge. But still he thinks that we form ethical judgments. So this is an important point to keep in mind. We do form ethical judgments. There were some for a time in the history of philosophy, and there's still some to this day, who think that we don't form ethical judgments, or that the ethical sentences that we express really express facts about, like, our feelings or our emotions. Well, Mackie thinks that when we express ethical judgments, we're trying to say something true. It's just that in every instance we say something false, just because there aren't any facts to make our judgments true in the first place. This is sometimes called Mackie's error theory, right? We form an ethical judgment about something, but at every turn we're saying something that turns out to be false. So we never express true ethical judgments, according to Mackie, on this error theory view. So Mackie's piece, the subjectivity of values, subjectivity of ethical values, rightness, wrongness, goodness, badness, and the like. What Mackie wants to say is that these things come from internal to us. They're purely subjective things. So when we think about the argument that he gave before about ethical judgments being the kinds of things that intrinsically guide us to act, motivate us to act, what Mackie is saying is that those judgments are ultimately grounded in our psychologies. They're ultimately subjective in this way then, and guide us in our behaviors. We shouldn't think that, and because of this intrinsic or necessary connection between moral motive or ethical motivation, as it's called, and the ethical judgments that we make, we should think that the ethical judgments ultimately are grounded in or reduced somehow to facts about our psychology, as opposed to facts existing in the objective world outside of our psychology. And that's why he claims that the values here are one and all subjective. Thank you for watching, everybody.